Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devya Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Vrindevyo Sarvalokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chadarmasya Sarvadharma Sarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Mangalam Om Sarashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamamashmarachara Prayantam Vande Gurum Paramparam Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Deva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Bhadrakali Namo Nityam Saraswati Namo Namaha Veda Viranga Vedanta Vijjastana Evacha Sri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om Jai Ma Jai Ma Jai Ma. So after 30 meetings, we finally finished Chapter 1 of the Devi Gita from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. Those online who are joining us for the first time, the core translation we're using is by C. Mackenzie Brown, available. It has some nice has a commentary and some nice academic comments also, notes that are very helpful. And the Devi Gita are the teachings of the Devi, especially the supreme goddess Bhuvaneshwari, who is the supreme goddess, the primary deity of the Devi Bhagavatam. And it's her teachings, it's her song, or her words, and we've only heard a few of her words so far, not really any of her teachings yet. So the 76, 77 something verses that we've studied so far, we're telling the frame story about the giving up of the body of Sati, the rising of a great demon named Taraka, and then the gods retreating high into the Himalayas to do thousands of years of tapasya and austerity, worshiping the Divine Mother, to get a boon from her. She appeared first as a pillar of light, then as a beautiful form of Bhuvaneshwari Devi, and then they recited beautiful prayers. And she asked them why they have summoned her, why they are worshiping her, what do they want, why have they gathered together. And so they mentioned their main prayer is that she would have to be born. So because she would have to take birth to marry Shiva, so that Shiva could have a child, that they could have a child that could kill Tatakasura and thus liberate the world and them from this great suffering that they're in, as well as the higher prayer that we always have devotion, unswerving devotion to your lotus feet. So that in a very just form is what we've discussed so far, with all the different sadhanas they did and the deep symbolism of her iconographic revelation. We discussed so many things. It's been very, today I was driving around doing errands and I was just going through, all the different topics just in that first chapter. That before her teachings have started, so many teachings have been given in the form of the stories and background. And then she gave another and then she ended the chapter ended with the goddess giving, not only will she be born, but saying that because the Himalaya, the Lord Himalaya, the king of mountains, has worshipped her without any selfish motive, it was pure devotion, that she will be born, an aspect of herself, or she will be born in his family as his daughter. And so his emotional reaction, we discussed last week, emotional reaction to that. And then he asked, after praising her and being very humble and overwhelmed by this revelation that she'd be born in his family, he asked the core questions that will be what the next 10 chapters, the next 9 chapters of teachings we'll discuss. Let me find it here. I no longer have the graphic on my computer, so I'll have to look at it on the book itself. You have the Himalayan praise to her. This is verse 72 of the last chapter, chapter 1. As you have already granted me one favor through your loving compassion, would you also please describe for me your true nature? as explained in all the Upanishads. If you remember, I think the term was sarva Vedanta, sarva anta Vedanta, something like that. The end of the Vedas, the conclusion, Siddhanta of the Vedas, of the Upanishads, therefore of the Vedas. Right. It further described the paths both of yoga and knowledge, combined with devotion, as approved by scriptures. Explain the supreme ruler, O Bhuvaneshwari, supreme ruler, so that I may become one with you. Now, the gods did their prayers. They were doing the sadhana, and she appeared to all the gods, and all the gods would be listening and experiencing the rest of the teachings and revelations of the Devi Gita. But now it could become much more intimate. It could be Himalaya. Now he's not asking, teach us how to become one with your central nature, or tell us the path of bhakti and jnana, and like this. He's saying, teach me, explain to me, how can I be one with your nature? Now it's gotten very much more intimate. And of course, this there's a sometimes the understanding of the scene is that he's a spokesperson for the devas, right? And that's okay. In the story, he seems to be the spokesperson. But another way to understand it, what are the devas? The devas are many things. The devas are the devas, right? But the devas symbolically and yogically can be interpreted as the senses, as all aspects of ourselves are the devas, the higher aspects of ourselves are the devas. Very often in some texts where it says deva, in order to make sense of a verse, if you understand deva to be senses, like the energy, powers or gods of the senses, then all of a sudden the verse will make sense. So there's examples of the devas being the senses, or aspects of our being, or aspects of our adjuncts and powers of our person are the devas. So the devas are all in this story. We can imagine them now, that all the devas taken together. The center of the devas is the Himalayas, the king of the mountain, the highest peak of the Himalayas, the lord of the top of mountains. So he's the central personality. And so we can, if we're trying to identify with the story and trying to listen as if Ma is speaking to us, right? That Himalayas represents us in this, our inner core personality that's asking these profound questions. So let's see here. Get a sip of tea in me. Let's see her answer. How she begins the answer. Does that come up? Okay, thank you. Okay, so each chapter of on our website, on the student portal website, has a different themed picture. So this is the picture that we're using for chapter 2, right? And chapter 2 has been described as the goddess, the supreme cause of creation. I just realized I'm in the wrong page to share, but that's picture, good picture I wanted. That's the picture. That other picture is a picture I chose because it's the Devi looks like supreme. She's the supreme ruler and supreme on her high throne surrounded by clouds. I thought it was a good picture. So here we go. Verse 1. This is chapter 2, Devi Gita, chapter 2, verse 1. The title, I'm not sure if the title is exactly in my Sanskrit. I'm not sure if it has a Sanskrit title for the chapter. The title that was given, at least if it's not the actual title, the title given by Mackenzie Brown, the goddess as supreme cause of creation. So that's going to be the main theme of the whole chapter, is the goddess as supreme cause of creation. So the idea of having a cause of creation, another way we would say that, kind of in Western theology, we would call that the creator, right? You know, if you have a creation, you have a creator. And we have to also remember that sometimes by using this term creator and creation, right, creature, creation, and creator, right, not all schools of Indian philosophy and Indian theology have that worldview. The Western religious tradition that's strongly focused on, focused on creation and creator. And, you know, and so many of the arguments for the existence of God, we discussed some of them earlier discussions, are along the lines of, oh, if the world seems to have been designed, therefore there has to be a designer, right? And so there's a lot of arguments are based upon this idea. So if there's a creation, if we use that word, there has to be creator. So what is a creator? Creator is the cause, right? So you could say, oh, the cause of something is a creator of a creation, right? So cause could be a person who simply wills something to be, like in Judeo-Christian tradition. There's a supreme person, a supreme deity, by its or hers or his, we would say hers, his active will, a creation as a creator, a creation flashes into existence, right? So that's one view, right? But there's other views of creation, like some of the Indian philosophers will use comments like rather than creation, they use causation, right? A causer, right? And Christian theologians also use as the first the uncaused cause, and like we have important philosophers have used that term, those term ideas also. But cause is not just oh, if I have a cup, so somebody made the cup, so the cause of the cup is the maker of the cup. But the cause of the cup is also the material of the cup, or the cause of the cup is also the purpose of the cup, or the cause of the cup just is existence itself, without which there could be no cup, right? So there's all kinds of ways, and I think we've enumerated them before. There, Aristotle had his list of versions of causation, and I think in the introduction, Mackenzie Brown's introduction, lengthy introduction, he goes into that the Bhuvaneshwari is the cause of creation, the cause of the world in every possible way. Material cause, efficient cause, like this, sufficient cause, all those versions of causation. So, but there's ways of thinking of existence not as being created, right? Maybe it always existed. So if the world, and there are views that the world always existed, some of the ideas of the cyclical world is based upon that. It comes and it's constantly cycling into something that looks like non-existence and existence. It's manifested, it's sometimes manifested and unmanifested. Other views, it's always like it is, more or less, right? There's changes within it, but it's always here. The world's always here. There's no reason to think like in Western religious thought. It's common to think, oh, well, it had to have a beginning, but it will never end, right? We can think of the world exists and it will always go on existence, but it had a beginning sometimes. So some Indian thinkers have said, no, the world, we can imagine the world always existing in the future, and therefore there's no reason to it didn't previously exist. So that version of causation, or that version of creation doesn't make the same amount of sense, right? But so we have to go to other forms of causation, right? Like the cause of a wave, right? Maybe nobody made a wave. Waves have always existed, or maybe a wave always exists, perhaps. I can imagine such a thing. But there is a cause of that wave. Water is the cause of the wave, right? For instance, right? So the cause or the creator of the wave is water, not a person who splashes the water or something like that, can create the wave. So there's different ways of considering creation. So that's going to be discussed here, because the Devi Bhagavatam is ultimately, I can't have to be careful what I say. It's also, at least if not ultimately, it's also a non-dualistic text, an Advaitic text, right? I mentioned before that it gives Advaita a pride of place, right? Perhaps partially because of the importance of Advaita as a philosophical system, a Sanskrit Upanishadic philosophical system, already at the time of the development of the Devi Bhagavatam, Devi Gita, right? So we have to make the connections, but also philosophically, it makes arguments that are classically Advaitin, right? Advaitic, right? And by Advaitic, I mean a radical monism, that there's only one being, only one existence, right? So if there's only one, what about us? What about this, right? Where in Sanskrit we say Jeev Jagat. What about us individuals, seemingly individuals? If individuals, or if we actually exist, how do we actually exist when there's only one? And if we seem to exist, how do we seem to exist when there's only one? right? How did that happen, right? And what about the world? The world actually exists. How did it actually exist when there's only one? And if it only seems to exist but doesn't actually exist, how does it seem to exist as only one? So this is a question that radical Advaita, extreme forms of non-duality, monism, have to explain or try to explain, perhaps, right? But the Devi Gita, the Devi Bhagavatam, is also a devotional text, and not just in a way like, oh, devotion is a stage to the realization of Brahman, the non-dual Brahman, although there may be statements like that occasionally made by characters in the text, right? That's not, I don't believe, from my reading, it's not the gist of the text, right? That the absolute non-dual, we would say, impersonal or formless conception of reality is one of the goddess's rupas, one of her ways of understanding her essential nature. There's others also as Bhuvaneshwari, as a goddess who controls and creates and sustains and manipulates and saves and teaches and nurtures and punishes and acts in the world of name and form, as the world and in the world, right? So we have to always keep in mind both the Advaitic stance as well as theistic and devotional theistic stance, where she's also a personal goddess that actually exists, not just a name and form that we superimpose upon an impersonal reality, something like that. That's how some schools, some ways of presenting Advaita sometimes resort to explaining things like that. So she exists as a supreme ruler, she exists transcendent as Brahman, and she exists as manifested as the world, right? And it is us in one sense. So we have to keep these in mind, but as we dive into her initial answer will be stating a strong Advaitic principle. But instead of me telling you what she says, before she says it, let's hear what she says. Go back here. That's one. Okay. śṛṇvantu nirjarāḥ sarve vyāharntyā vaco mama yasya śravaṇa-mātreṇa mad-rūpa-tvaṃ prapadyate. So I'll read his translation first. May all the gods attend to what I have to say. By merely hearing these words of mine, one attains my essential nature. śṛṇvantu means listen. Nirjarāḥ. So nirjarāḥ, this term he translates as gods, right? I mean, all the gods. Sarve, nirjarāḥ, sarve, nirjarāḥ, sarve. So it's interesting the word that she uses, right? When she calls the gods immortals, right? So maybe he's talking to us. I'm remembering at the Parliament of Religions, Swami Vivekananda's not opening address, but his official reading of the Hinduism paper on Hinduism, where he says, children of immortal bliss, right? Amrita Putra. So Amrita Putra means, children of immortality, right? That's the term he used, children of immortality, right? He's quoting from a verse in the Upanishads, right? That we come from bliss and live in bliss, and we are eternal, right? So by calling, oh eternal ones, right? Listen to what I have to say. And then what she has to say is that the reality always exists, is never born and never dies, right? Oh, eternal ones, let me tell you about my nature as eternal, right? So our nature, at least some aspect of our nature, is her nature, is the eternal, right? So there's lots of, like, the word chosen to address the gods is important as immortal. There's other words you could use. You could say, oh devas, oh suras, oh shiny ones. Oh immortal ones. Let me tell you about immortality. What is immortal? What the unchanging nature is. So I like this. There's a yeah. So nirjarāḥ sarve what is it? Vyāharntyā vyāharntyā, vyāharntyā is words, right? Vaco mama, my words. Listen, O immortal ones, to my words, right? So that's already whose words? These are her words, right? And of course, we could think, whose words are these? Who compose? How is there is a earthly history of the development of this text, right? And it's the Devi Gita specifically within the larger Devi Bhagavatam. There's a historical place that it finds itself in, by who the actual author or scribe who wrote these down, or the community from whom this text evolved, right? Or the goddess herself, this in ancient times, or before Parvati born to Himalayas, right? However we want to take this, right? But what it's being said is how we want to take it. These words are the words of the goddess. These are my words, and they have to be listened to very carefully, right? And that śṛṇvantu, or there's many words like it carefully, right? Telling something important. I'm remembering when making today, this listen carefully, listen to what I have to say idea came to me, because my own guru, Swami Bhajanananda Saraswati, he, when I first met him, I was 15, 16, something like 16 years old, probably. And he gave a lecture, and I remember, I'd seen anybody like him or heard anybody like them. And he says, like, please, my dear brothers and sisters, my own. I remember his wording was so beautiful, such a unique old generation of sadhu, right? Vedantic sadhu. My own self in the form of brothers and sisters, or ladies and gentlemen. My own self in the form of, right? So that was his Advaitic way of understanding. Even when he'd signed his letters, he'd thy own self, Vishnu Devanand, like, I'm yourself, you're myself. So my own self in the form of ladies and gentlemen, right? I am explaining my life, right? Please hear attentively, right? Listen, this is important, right? And the reason he said I'm explaining my life, right, is our Guruji did not have book learning in the classic sense, right? He was even in his childhood, he probably was illiterate, or mostly illiterate, very little schooling. But then in his older age, he learned English, he learned reading, could write, read. He knew 7 languages before he died, organically, and learned English in the 70s, right? But in his youth, he did not study scriptures. He left home. He didn't go to school except for a few grades, and he left home when he was 16, 17 years old as a sadhu, right? Without scriptural knowledge. He had knowledge from the gurus and the sadhus, but not scriptural knowledge. But under his guru's practice, he attained. He says, at the age of 18 or 16, 17, I gave up, I renounced this world, and under the teachings of my guru, I dived into spiritual practice, and I became successful, right? And I got new knowledge, right? And therefore, I'm explaining from my own personal experience. So he's somebody who claims to speak from his own experience, not from book knowledge, not bookish knowledge. Not bookish knowledge. His language is very sweet, right? Not bookish knowledge, my own experience, practical experience, right? But I remember it's like he always would start these lectures. Please listen carefully, or please hear me attentively, because this is important, right? So this is also the statement. But then Ma, the Divine Mother here, backs up her statement. But not only you should listen, because if you listen, you can attain my essential nature. Listening is sufficient. If you listen to me, one attains. One who listens by merely, what's the term here? My merely hearing, yasya śravaṇa-mātreṇa, just merely listening to these words, right, of mine. One attains mad-rūpa-tvaṃ. One attains to my own essential nature, my nature. You attain a nature like mine, you attain my nature. How does hearing liberate? So this term, mad-rūpa, has been glossed by Nilakanta, the ancient commentator, medieval commentator on this text, as One second. As sarupya is a form of liberation, where one can attain form or the essential nature of the God being worshipped. Right? There's different forms of liberation. But so she's saying that actually just listening to this, you can attain this form of liberation, merging or attaining a nature like mine, or attaining to my nature, or attaining a form like mine. Depends on the school of thought how you interpret this mad-rūpa, sarupya, mukti. So we have to think, what does that mean, right? So there's a tradition that's in Sanskrit. Actually, the word is here. Yes, here it says that yasya śṛṛavana. Śṛṛavana in the first sentence is śṛṇvantu, which is listen, and here śṛṛavana, listening. So listening is itself a spiritual practice, right? And in the bhakti traditions, and it's believed, Mackenzie Brown argues for this or mentions it in his commentary on this verse, or in these verses, that this is hearkening to devotional schools where listening is itself a spiritual practice, right? And so in several texts in the Bhagavatam, most famously in the mouth of Prahlad Maharaj, the little boy Prahlad, he teaches his schoolmates about the Nava Bhakti, the 9 forms of Bhakti. I think actually in the Siddhas Ramayana also mentions 9 forms of Bhakti, not the same 9, or 9 type or stages or path of practices of Bhakti, but this Nava Bhakti is a traditional list, right? Shravanam Kirtana Smarana Vandana Parasivana Dasyare Pujana Sakijana Atma Nivedana, right? So Govinda Dasa Bilasa. This is a song. The way I remember it, because I know a song by Govinda Das Kaviraj. It's from the ISKCON, has a songs of the Vaishnavacharyas. That's in that. This is a song that was very meaningful to me. Still is very meaningful to me. But there's periods of time when this was really important. This helped focus my mind. And the last line of this song lists what my mind prays and longs to be absorbed in these 9 processes of bhakti. Shravanam kirtana smarana vandana padasevana dasyare pujana sakijana atma nivedana govinda dasa abhilasare. My version of that song, right? Oh, my mind, just worship the lotus feet of, oh no, all right, get the words here. Govinda Dasa longs to hear the glories of the Lord. That's Shravana, hearing the Lord. Chant his glories, constantly remember him, offer prayers, serve his lotus feet, become his servant, worship him, serve him as friend, and completely offer him his very self. So this is playing on this idea. Just listening to the glories of the Divine Mother is a form of sadhana, is form of purification, and just listening not only to the glories, her glories, and her name, her activities, right? But even more, her teachings, her words. And then this also hints a little bit, a kind of little more tantric version of this, is where the words, the text itself has not only meaning, but also has power. And the power is not necessarily just in the meaning. The power is syllables. The power is in the sound and the words, especially if these words, as being presented here, are coming from the mouth of the Supreme Goddess herself, of the Supreme Brahman itself, right? Which means, right, the claim is that this is the same as the Vedas, and the Vedas have meaning, and the Vedas have mantric power, right? So just hearing these words, the vibration of the words has a liberating, purifying, salvific effect, meritorious effect also, right? And actually, this is a common, you find this throughout the Devi Bhagavatam in general. After a section is finished, a narration, then it will say the palstuti, the benefits of this chapter. And you'll say, those who recite this chapter at the time of the spring Navaratri, or at the time of building a house, at the time of establishing a kingdom, or time of having a child, or before having a child, will get this benefit, right? The very recitation of it of the text itself has power, has a liberating and purifying power, has karmic power also. It's the power of the mantric power, right? So I believe that it has both of these powers, that it has the power of the mantras itself, the sound, as well as power of the meaning, right? And so often when I see these verses, I believe that if we can recite the verses properly in Sanskrit, that itself has a transforming effect and a purifying effect. I feel it, right? But even if we don't, right, if we hear the words or read the words or speak the words or recite the words in English, right, that itself has some power. Maybe not the same mantric power, right, of the Sanskrit syllables, right? The divine phonemes that go to create, it's coming from the mouth of the goddess, like Vedic mantras, but the thoughts we're listening and stating and reaffirming and remembering and these divine teachings, right? So by merely hearing these words of mine, one attains to my essential nature. So if we don't hear these words, so let's twist it around. Of course, it doesn't say this. It does say if one doesn't hear these words of mine, one will never attain my essential nature. It doesn't go that far, but let's take like that. Like, what stops us from what are things that could help us attain our essential nature? Perhaps the teachings about how to attain our essential nature, right? And so, like, if you want to find a difficult, a place in the city that's hard to find, right? And I would tell you, here's a map. If one follows this map to said coffee house, then one can attain easily that coffee house, right? So if you want to attain her essential nature, the words describing how to attain her essential nature seem to be right. Can be taken that way too. Also, I think this claim, I'm speaking, listen to what I'm saying. Simply, if you hear what I'm saying, simply hearing what I'm saying is sufficient for you to attain liberation, my essential nature, right? That's a big statement. So I think also we have to consider that this is the idea that this is coming from the mouth of the goddess, the mouth of Brahman, right? Who the goddess who is Brahman, as like the Vedas and all scriptures, that this is Shruti, not Smriti, right? This becomes the category of Vedas. This is the kind of the claim, right? And so that means also, we've discussed many times in these classes, that the idea of a pramana, what is the evidence? Well, how do we know something? Right? What's a reliable way to gain knowledge? It's epistemology, basic epistemology. And different schools of Indian thought, different categories of pramana, different evidence, right? And most common, simplified form, we have our sense knowledge, right? We have inference, right? We like this, these are simple ways of understanding things, right? And reason about what we've experienced and we can infer, right? But there are things for which, right? There are things, some topics for which sense experience and based upon sense experience are insufficient, right? And some would hold that things that cannot be experienced from senses and reason from such experience, right, are unreliable, right? And there's a move. Some people would reject some religiously tinged metaphysical claims on this basis, right? Evidence. There's no physical evidence. There's no experiential evidence or demonstratable evidence, perhaps, for spiritual claims, right, of God and heaven and rebirth and hell and karma, and you can think of various religious topics, right? And so we can believe in them or not believe in them, but such things for which there's no evidence. There's no evidence for such topics. So in general, and Vedanta would hold, I think most schools of Vedanta, perhaps all schools of Vedanta would hold some version of this, is that for those things, the fact that senses cannot bring information about metaphysical topics, like the soul and God and self and reality and reincarnation and heaven and hell and all that stuff and all these categories, right? Doesn't mean that they don't exist. It means that the only way to get knowledge of those topics is not from the senses, right? And therefore, the way we get knowledge from those, different for one is called shabda pramana, the words of the Vedas, or the words of an apta, a higher trusted authority, right? Somebody or some that claims to have experience, who have firsthand knowledge, right, of such realities, right, and who we believe is trustworthy, right? So many people claim to have this firsthand knowledge about divine things, right? And I am generally a little bit, maybe by my temperament, right, I'm a little bit weary of such claims, right? So just to me, the claim to having such knowledge almost puts the category of being an unreliable source of such knowledge, right? So it's a kind of a catch-22 on this, right? So, but the idea that the Vedas, right, have such knowledge, right? They have knowledge of the Brahman. They reveal knowledge of Brahman, of heaven, of karma, of duty, things that we cannot experience ourselves or reason out on ourselves, right? Perhaps they give us knowledge, and and Orthodox traditions of Hinduism, one of the things that makes them Orthodox, Ashtikas, is they accept the Vedas as reliable. They accept the Vedas as the only possible authority, or the highest possible authority about transcendental matters, right? They also trust them, right? They could think we follow the Vedas, right? Or take the claim of the tantras, and in many cases the Puranas, and I think the claim happening here also is that the goddess herself, right, she has been already identified in the last few verses in the last chapter as Brahman. Her nature is established as the final conclusion of all the Upanishads, right? Therefore, anything she says is authoritative, trustworthy. She's the mother, she's our goddess, right? She's non-different from Brahman. So she knows what Brahman is. She knows the path to Brahman, right? And therefore since we trust her as her children, right, we consider her to be a reliable source, right, of this information, right? And of course, then we have to take a further on the historical causal chain, right? Do we trust the author of this text, right, who to actually describe what the supreme goddess has said, right? That's a little more tricky. So then we have the religiously believe the author of faith, the author we have is Vyasa. So Vyasa is a great sage who organized the Vedas with the incarnation of Vishnu himself, right? Who wrote the Mahabharata, right? Who organized who wrote the Brahma Sutra, even that's even a claim that some have made, that he's even the author of the Brahma Sutra. He is trustworthy, and he has accurately recorded what the God has said to the gods, and therefore we can trust not only can we, if the goddess speaks to us, she's worthy of being trusted, but this book is worthy of being trusted because it was authored and edited by Vyasa, right, the supreme guru, right? So that's the next level down. We can take a few more steps down if we know a little bit, perhaps a little bit of a critical analysis of the historical development of the text, and then we can think, do we trust how the text came, right? So I personally trust how the text came, even if it didn't come from the mouth of Vyasa, right, or from the goddess herself, right? The community, minimally, I'll give this my act of leap of faith, is that the authors of this text, authors of this text, right, were writing about profound spiritual knowledge passed down in tradition for community. Because we're reading this, we've come to these authors, we've come to the goddess, we've come to Vyasa, and we came to whoever the scribes or the authors in the community of the text, right? We're sitting at their feet, right? We're part of that community, right? So we've already accepted at some level, this is pramana, right? And we want to know minimally, we can go even step down. There's always something more minimal, right? But we could say minimally, we accept, if we want to have knowledge of a Sanskritic tantric goddess text, right? And how this community and this text and genre saw the development of goddess theology, just for that purpose, I think the study is important. But we approach, I think, we take this approach more personal, right? We're studying at the feet of the sages, we're studying at the feet of Vyasa, either the person Vyasa or the tradition of Vyasa, of the ones who narrate and who write down and who organize and pass down the oral tradition, who pass the oral tradition into written form, come down to us, right? So this verse, let's see here. Let's go to the verse here. Okay. What in the previous chapter, I read the Himalayas request, and we go back to, I just want to recite that verse again. Sarva Vedanta Anta Siddham Cha Mad-rūpa-tvaṃ Bruhi Me Tata. Would you please also describe for me your true nature as explained in all the Upanishads? That means she is the one who is spoken. This teaching is an Upanishad, right? This teaching is an Upanishad. This is the essence. What we have to listening to help us attain or allow us to attain her essential nature is an Upanishad. This is the essence of all the Upanishads, right? Right. And what are Upanishads? Upanishads, even the word Upanishad has been interpreted to be sitting nearby. So it's an intimate revelation, a conversation between guru and disciples, or guru and disciple, right? And so here she's the guru and the disciple is Himalayan gods, right? Or the text of Vyasa is the guru, and we are the disciples sitting at their feet, listening to these teachings, right? So the Upanishads are by nature, right, at least their theme of the nature of an intimate and an esoteric spiritual transmission, and very intimate between mouth and ear of secret teachings, right, and esoteric, not easy to catch. Right? So she's giving the Upanishads. This is an Upanishadic revelation, equal to Upanishadic revelation. So if we hear these words, right? So I've heard these words. I think I have. I've read these words. I've heard myself recite them or speak them. I've even tried, in my very bad Sanskrit pronunciation, to recite them, right? This little section, because you can see that when by hearing these words attains my essential nature, it's to your benefit to try to recite these words or get a recording of somebody reciting these words, right? Hear these words and attain her essential nature. So I've heard these words. I've tried to recite them. I'll be speaking them over the coming weeks. You can read them. You have the book. If you don't have the book, I provide a PDF. You yourself can read and say them out loud or read them to each other to attain her essential nature, right? But do I know her essential nature? Have you all realized her essential nature? Mad-rūpa-tvaṃ, sarupya mukti, have attained sarupya mukti. Well, it's not that. Maybe it's not so easy, right? Maybe it's not so easy. So the question is, why is it not so easy, right? Is she not telling the truth? She's telling the truth. She's a reliable source of knowledge, right? So there's reasons, perhaps. Like if I tell you, like let's say I know something you don't know, and I try to explain it to you. So theoretically, as soon as you hear me explain it to you, you now know it, right? Right. But maybe you don't know it. Maybe you don't understand what I said, right? Maybe you're not qualified to understand what I said. Maybe you don't have the prerequisite knowledge and training or expertise or subtlety or mental purity, whatever the topic is, whatever. Like I mentioned the other some classes ago, I I took one morning, it was the physics class in Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, right? The first thing the teacher said out of his mouth, I didn't understand. I was so bad at math and I had no background, right? Even the opening lecture, the opening 40-minute class, I couldn't understand anything he was talking about, right? So theoretically, he could say, "Oh, dear students, please listen to my lecture on statistics. Here, even listening to this lecture, you will understand the basics of statistics." Right? Not me. I heard them and didn't understand anything. And I realized I did not have the qualification, the background, the prerequisites to understand. So that's one reason why sometimes we may not understand even hearing. Right? Hearing these a high spiritual truth may not awaken us because we don't have the prerequisites. We ourselves are not apta. We don't have the prerequisite qualifications. So then part of our sadhana, when we hear such statements, and we hear the statements, listen to the spiritual teachings will give you liberation. We hear the spiritual teachings and we don't get liberation. Or listening to the spiritual, you'll have knowledge and devotion. We listen to spiritual teachings, we don't get knowledge and devotion. It means that we're not ready. And we have to think, what are the prerequisites? What are the assumed qualifications that we should try to develop? So that our sadhana becomes developing those qualifications, right? Another point is that this is subtle stuff, right? And if somebody states, if the goddess says, I am Brahman, right? The guru tells you, thou art Brahman, right? Tatvamasi, thou art that. And you say, and tells you, say, aham-brahmasmi, I am Brahman. And you say, aham-brahmasmi. And that's true. These statements, we do not, maybe we doubt, but even if we don't doubt that they're true, have the experience, right? We're not, so we don't have, and part of it is not just because we don't know the language. We don't know enough Sanskrit to understand what the tat and the twaṃ and the yasya means, right? Maybe we have all that knowledge. It's not that difficult. Well, we can learn that in an afternoon, right? But we may not have the mental purity to have those words have an effect, right? And so the medieval Vedanta scholars have gone into a little complicated descriptions of how this works. But ultimately, we need to have a sattvic mind. Without a sattvic mind, no amount of spiritual knowledge will have much effect, right? And therefore, a lot of our spiritual practice, of various types of spiritual practice and dharmic practice, right, becomes purifying the mind and heart, purifying the mind, right? What our sannyas guru Swami Bhajanananda Maharaj described as mana shuddhi, all sadhanas for mana shuddhi. The mind's purified. Spiritual teachings and spiritual teachings can be understood, and spiritual practice can be effective. And until then, our spiritual practice is to purify the mind. So that spiritual practice can be effective. I'm going to close my door real quick. Hold on. Sorry, bugs are coming in. It's a nice evening. So we need to develop sattva, and therefore sadhana and dharmic lifestyle, and perhaps even lifetimes of dharma and lifetimes of sadhana are required, so that one word, one sentence, one glance, even maybe one glance of a state, right? Some diksha is not by words; it's simply by glance or by touch or by wish, right? It'd be enough for the mind for the self to be known, or for the goddess to be seen. However we understand that, right? Another thing that can happen, or happens, right, is that if somebody tells you a teaching that you don't understand, right, is because you misunderstand it, right? So sometimes what we hear from the scriptures, we don't understand properly, right? And therefore we misunderstand, therefore we need to clear our misunderstandings, right? Sometimes there's doubt. Sometimes we hear it and we understand it, and we don't believe it. How can that be true? Like somebody we hear, oh, that everything, I am the source of everything. And the one that's me doesn't change. Well, that doesn't make sense, because what about Maya? What about the world? What about me? What about this world? Like, well, how can we? And an argument, and then herself in the next, in 2 verses will say how the one becomes, how I existed before everything, and I became everything. How did you do that? She'll give an answer. We can say, well, it doesn't. I don't understand that, or I don't believe that. It doesn't make sense. It's not convincing, right? And therefore, there's argument, there's debate, there is tarka, reasoning out, putting forth objections, having those objections cleared. This is the traditional guru shishya work, the guru disciple struggle, right? As we try to understand, as disciples, we try to understand what the guru is saying, what the scripture says, or as a guru tries to make us understand what he or she is saying, what the scripture is saying, right? So let's hear what she has to say, right? So we know that we have that to pay attention, and I encourage you all to pay attention to what she's saying, especially her. She starts big in a second, right? The first verse that official teaching is big. If we understand this first sentence, maybe this first sentence is sufficient, that we have union with her essential nature, perhaps. Let's see what the verse is. Verse 2, chapter 2. Change so I can see a little better. My eyes. I need to change glasses. Sorry, I'm constantly struggling with my ear, and my glasses are a year and a half outdated and full of scratches. So I'm trying to find the sweet spot where I can see through my glasses here. Yeah. Oh, yes, here it is. Aham-evevāsa pūrvaṃ tu nānyat kiñcin-nagādhipa tadātma-rūpaṃ cit-saṃvit parabrahmaika-nāmakam. Okay. Aham. So what does she say? This is we have to listen to. I'll read the translations. We can start with that. I alone, aham. The Sanskrit is too sweet. Aham-evevāsa pūrvaṃ. I, aham, eva, alone, right? Asya, I alone, right? Pūrvaṃ, in the beginning, before there was anything, before there was this world, before there was time, what philosophically is time, space, causation, nama-rūpa, like that. So before, in the before time, not in the before time, before there was time, I alone existed. Aham-evevāsa pūrvaṃ tu nānyat kiñcin-nagādhipa na tu nānyat kiñcin. There was nānyat. There was na and anyat, no other. There's only me. Before anything, I existed, and there was nobody else besides me. Nagādhipa, O mountain king, O king of the mountains. There's a name that's included here. Nagādhipa, talking to the mountains, talking to us, O king of your mountain, right? Her statement, I alone existed in the beginning, or before, right? There was nothing else at all. There was no other being. There was no other thing, right? O mountain king. That's a big statement. That is a direct statement of Advaita Vedanta, right? Usually, if you've heard such statement that there's only one being existing before anything, when there's another thing, right? We in Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, we would say, oh, that's Brahman. Brahman is the one being. That's by definition the one being before anything that exists, the one, right? But if you think, she's saying, I alone existed. I, the goddess, I, Bhuvaneshwari, right? I, Brahman. She's identifying as both Bhuvaneshwari and as Brahman, or not identifying. She's revealing herself as Brahman. So there's a verse, I think it's pointed out in the commentary here, the Chandogya Upanishad. It's 6.2.1. If you're looking it up, you can look it up online if you'd like. There's some good fleshings out of the verse. Chandogya Upanishad 6.2.1. This is a verse that's very similar to this verse, right? That the commentators believe that this is kind of restating what's in the Upanishad, but instead of describing Brahman, it's describing her, right, as Brahman and as the one being, right? Let's see what it says. Samya idam So, hey, Somya means young man. This is the guru speaking to his son or to his disciple. Hey, Somya, idam argriye sat eva ekam advitiyam. I think we may have shared this verse in the past. It's a favorite verse. Comes, it's a classic monist non-dualistic verse, right? Idam argye, right? This means this world, right? Right, as we see it, argye, before this world. It's like he's saying before the beginning. This says here idam argye, before the Upanishad says before this world, before this, you, this, us, they, right? It says sat eva. Only sat means truth or existence. Eva was. There was only truth existed. Ekam eva advitiyam. Ekam, one. Eva, advitya means without, advitya, without second. So the Upanishad says, I am one. I mean, before this world, there was only existence, sat eva, right? And its nature is one. So the only thing that existed is existence, sat, right? That existence is only one, and without a second. I think I may have mentioned in the previous talk, my tedious class, or my Guruji, Swami Bhajanananda Saraswati, he very often, that was his favorite, one without a second. Only one without a second, only one without a second. It was very common. It was on the tip of his tongue when he's describing divine things, about the nature of God and Brahman. It's only one without a second. Subtler, greater than the greatest. Only one without a second. He'd say that. I've heard him. I can hear his voice saying it 100 times in my memory, right? Quoting in English this verse, a central verse of Advaita. Before this world, there's only existence existed. There is only existence. So that's a strange thing to say. We don't always, in language, we don't always talk this way. Double checking something here. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I forgot to write something down here. A second. Oh, sorry. I sorry. I lost my place. No problem. More caffeine. The last of the caffeine. Right. So if you go to, I mean, this is a foundational, highly mystical, radically monistic statement that not only did one being exist, beingness existed only. Not that like there's only one person with a second person. There was only existence, sat, or truth. Here it probably means existence itself, right? And in ancient, you get more ancient. This is in the Western system, very ancient, pre-Platonic, pre-Socratic philosophy, like Parmenides and things like this. People like in that category, they also talked about existence, right, and being, right, and it's like not the existence of something, that's something, or of a being, it's existence itself. And it says in that existence they concluded what I think Aristotle said, that this is almost maddening. Thinking about this stuff, go crazy. I believe there's a famous line like this. It's almost drives you crazy, right? Because it's not like it can only be one. Existence, being can only be one. This is how they rationalize, right? Being itself can only be one. So like this cup has, if the cup exists, it has being, right? But being can only be one. only be one, and there's only one without a second, right? So what about the cup? It gets complicated. We have to figure out a way to get a cup, right? And everything else, and things that are in the cup, the person drinking the cup, the person enjoying, and the environment of the cup, and things like this, all those things out of only one without a second, only being without a second, right? In the Devi Mahatmyam, in the Chandi, right? Many of you know this verse. It's a favorite of Swami. We became focused on it because of Swami Ambikananda Maharaj is focus devotion to this verse. This is a very important verse. He actually has it written above his shrine, above his picture of Ma on his shrine. This verse is there to constantly remember, right? And it's in chapter 10 of the Chandi, Devi Mahatmyam, verse 5, where Nishumba, I believe, Nishumba has died, I believe, and Nishumba is losing to the Devi and her matikas, from the goddess, so many forms have come out and are fighting. And then Shumba, although he brought tens of thousands of armies, personnel, right? He has watched this band of wild Shakti, the goddess, different goddesses, decimate his army, and then he challenges. He says, "Oh, you're being unfair, right? You're fighting on the strength of others," accusing her of not fighting alone, right? Of course, the point of the setup is so that she could make this, which is one of the punches, I believe, of the Chandi, of the Devi Mahatmyam, right? And I think this verse is pushing. It's in that same flavor of the goddess as the essence of the non-dual essence of the goddess, right? Where the goddess says, "Ikavyaham jagat yatra dvitiya na mamaparaha mamapara." I am the only one here. Ekavyaham jagat yatra. I am the only one here, and then besides me, who else is here? Nobody else. There's nobody. I'm the only one here. Who else is there beside me? Right. This is considered the Shaktas. We like to say that this is a Mahavakya of the Chandi. The Devi Mahatmya is Mahavakya. This is the great statement of non-duality. And then in the story, in the Leela of the story, all the goddesses that were fighting on her in her army was reabsorbed in her, and she's the only one there. So think about, we have that realization, right? That we see and have the experience that everything disappears, gets reabsorbed, and there's only one. So who were they? Of course, who are all those goddesses? They were her. Where did they go? Whether they went back into her, and they came out of her. Did they ever exist? It's complicated, how we understand this. Right. So what does she say? So I alone existed in the beginning. There was nothing else at all, O Mountain King. Tadātma-rūpaṃ cit-saṃvit parabrahmaika-nāmakam. My true self. My phone is chastising me, telling me you want to respond to that. My watch. My true, what is it? The verse. Mad-rūpa. Tadātma-rūpaṃ. That self, right? My true self, right? That self, my true self, right? Nāmakam. That there's only that true self, myself, that's only one, without a second, that was there before anything else. Before there was anything, only I exist. One without a second. That's myself. What is it? It's known by various names. Namakam, right? He actually, I think it is known as, actually it says, is named. It's named variously, right? And that's a common move. It says something is known by various things. So like Brahman is, or God is one, but is known. We know that famous statement that truth is one, but sages call it by various names or describe it variously. right? So similarly, this Brahman, or this self, this tadātma, myself, right, rūpaṃ, that my pure real nature, right, is known by various names, and three such names are going to be given, or three such terms or ideas to be given, and they're may mean, what part of it is to understand that they mean roughly the same thing, right? And here it's cit-saṃvit and parabrahmaika. Parabrahmaika means parabrahmaika. And he is translated as parabrahmaika, as the one supreme Brahman. It's a big punchline, right? That myself is the one supreme Brahman, right? So by saying the one supreme Brahman is saying the non-dual Brahman, because Brahman is not always thought of in non-dualistic terms in many schools of Vedanta. In the Advaitic schools that many of you are probably familiar, Brahman is usually seen as Advaitic, the one without a second. So she is like one of the one. This is the Brahman that's being mentioned, the one supreme Brahman, right? Parabrahmam, and as chit and saṃvit. So he is translated in his own way. He says chit is pure consciousness, and saṃvit is highest intelligence, right? And that's okay. I mean, I have spent actually several, probably 6 years when I first learned the word saṃvit, trying to understand how it's used, and it's used in so many different ways, right? So generally speaking, saṃvit means consciousness, right? And chit means consciousness, right? Chit means consciousness, awareness. All right, get the right page here. All right. So it in the Vaishnava scriptures, saṃvit is like the aspect of the Lord, right? The Vaishnava, the theistic tradition, right? The God's consciousness, the conscious, cognizant faculties of God. When God thinks, that is saṃvit, right? In the Tantra-loka, in Kashmir Shaivism, for instance, the same term is used more like our cognitive consciousness, cognitive awareness, like this, right? So generally, some awareness, sometimes it's used as like the unitive consciousness, when you have some of the experience of divine union and unit experience, the consciousness at that moment, that is described as saṃvit. So illuminated consciousness, unitive consciousness, consciousness. So chit and saṃvit are both mean more or less similar things of consciousness or awareness, or to know, to be aware of, right? And then parabrahma. So that's, if we take these to be three names, and that's what's being said of the same thing, that the nature of parabrahma is chit and saṃvit, is awareness, is consciousness, right? Is illuminated consciousness, right? Pure consciousness, right? So in the Upanishads, we get a highly developed idea of Brahman. Brahman is the all reality. And generally the text we could start reciting. I think here's some good, as verses go forward in the commentary in our text commentary, there's a bunch of verses that will help support these definitions. You can find Upanishadic verses. You can study those on your own. But in the Upanishads, when Brahman becomes, or is understood as all pervasive, as infinite, the eternal truth, as consciousness and bliss, it does not change, yet it's the cause of all change. Maybe it's the cause of all change. In this version, it will be the cause of all change, or it doesn't change, or it seems to be the cause of all change, perhaps, right? It's the single unity binding all plurality and diversity that exists in the universe, right? And so, but here it says parabrahma, not Brahman, supreme Brahman, right? So supreme Brahman in the Advaitic schools is it also in Vedanta, there's many ideas of Brahman. Two words we should probably know is Sagun Brahman and Nirgun Brahman. Sagun Brahman means with gunas, with qualities, right? And nirgun Brahman is Brahman without qualities, without attributes, right? And so in fierce forms of radical Advaita, non-dualism and monism, right? Of these two, of Sagun Brahman and Nirgun Brahman, they would hold Sagun Brahman is parabrahman, and Nirgun Brahman is aparabrahman. It's not the Supreme Brahman. Sagun Brahman, God with form, right? Both the world of name and form, or the God of that world, which has a name and form, a deity, an Ishvara, right? If there is such a being, he's not supreme. That he's a type of Brahman. He's Brahman interpreted, or Brahman stepped down, Brahman misread, like this, right? And the Supreme Brahman, Parabrahman, is the non-dual, without beyond name, the Nirgun Brahman. In the devotional schools, right, Ramanuja and Madhava, right, they also have Nirgun Brahman and Sagun Brahman, but they hold that Sagun Brahman, God with form, is Parabrahman. That is Supreme Brahman. And Nirgun Brahman, Brahman without form, as a general principle, is a lower reading, or maybe even a misreading of that Supreme Brahman, who is really Vishnu, for instance, right? Or in the Ganapatya schools is really Ganesha, right? In the theistic, dualistic schools, they may hold that there is such thing as a Nirgun Brahman, a non-dual, formless type of experience or reality, right? But the supreme form of Brahman is the personal Brahman, right, with form. But I think here, because it says parabrahmaika, the one supreme Brahman, right, most likely, and from the other text, is that it's privileging the non-aspect. Although she, in a few verses, will show that I am that one, I Bhuvaneshwari, right? That also has that not just she's Nirgun, but she's also Sagun, the goddess Bhuvaneshwari, who lives in Manidweep, who controls the world, who pervades everything, who is the source of everything. These verses will unfold this. Yeah. So I think because it is 8:20 and I'm trying to be a good boy, I'm not that good, but the mother forgives me. Not to go too late. We'll stop there for tonight. And if you have any, let me read the two verses for closure here. May all the gods attend to what I forgot to include the verse. This is Devi Ovacha, Sri Devi Ovacha. The goddess spoke. The goddess spoke. I'll have to add that into the graphic. May all attend to what I say. By merely hearing these words of mine, one attains my essential nature. I alone existed in the beginning. There was nothing else at all, O Mountain King. My true self is known as pure consciousness, the highest intelligence, the one supreme Brahman. So then comes the question, if there's only one Brahman, what about everything else? What about everything that came after? She was there, the one without a second beginning. How do we get an after? How do we get time, space, causation? How do we get name and form? How do we jeev jagat? Right? So she'll give her answer, and we'll jump into that next week. Thank you for your kind attention. Sri Guru Maharaj Ji ki jai, Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Swami Maharaj Ji ki jai, Jai Ma Dakshineshwari Dakshinakali ki jai, Jai Ma Dakshineshwari Bhavatarini Dakshinakali ki jai, Bhuvaneshwari Devi ki jai. Any questions or comments? You can click yourself in. Come on. Mikananda's busy today, so he can't be our host.
Guruji?
Yep, Mikananda's here.
Ah.
Oh no, who's there? Okay, that's
I
Elijah.
sound like Vivekananda. Okay.
Jai Ma.
Jai Ma. I had a couple. There's a couple just general questions, and
Yeah.
then I have some other ones, but these are just really short ones.
Yep.
I had commented if you could share the photo of Bhuvaneshwari Ma that was in the first slide.
Yeah.
And then what was the name of the 9 forms of bhakti? Something.
Nava Bhakti.
Oh, it's okay. It's just Nava Bhakti.
Nava Bhakti, yeah.
And then
Nava Bhakti, you can look up also. You'll find
yes.
it's the most common form is in the Bhagavatam, and in the but also is a beautiful list in the Tulsidas Ramayana also. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other short one was if you'd be able to share the maybe just a link to it after this, the song that you had sung about about Nava Bhakti.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. So
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's a good one. It's a good way to remember.
I would like to learn it.
Yeah, it's very beautiful, and actually, I believe it's in Sanskrit, maybe in Bengali.
So
Yeah.
my other question, which I had written even before you began to talk about understand, like being able to have this manashuddhi and this pure mind in order to understand these words of Goddess Bhuvaneshwari. I had been wondering, how is it that we go about awakening this? You know, in the Devi Mahatmyam, it talks about how, you know, Surata and Samadhi went to made us, right? How do we awaken this made us in us?
Yeah.
And then if Swadhyaya, right? So when you're talking about these verses, right, one of the important things that Patanjali talks about in his Yoga Sutras in the Niyamas, or no, the Yamas, right, talks about Swadhyaya, which is this study of ourself and study of spiritual texts, and by extension we can say mantra japa and this sort of thing in recitation as being one of those means of bringing about this mana shuddhi and awakening of the Vedas, which leads into what is sort of the most effective way that we can go about bringing about this sattvic and pure mind. They're all connected.
Yes. Well, so there's no one, I'm uncomfortable giving one answer, right? Because we're all different, right? But we're probably similar enough that we're gathered together on Wednesday night, you know, to have something like that. But in the text that we're dealing with now, right? They were ready. They were qualified. He was qualified at least, right? I don't know if she's talking to she says, "Oh gods, listen," or she's talking just to him, right? He was qualified for sure. If the gods are qualified, what have they done? They had done years of sadhana, right? And the list of sadhana was they did japa, they did nyasa, they did recitation, they did meditation, they did yagya, they did puja, you know, they did hard austerities, whatever so I would think these are the details of our spiritual life, right? Those are that's a example, right? Right. We have our own example, right? Our example is not that dissimilar to theirs, right? So we could, you know, you could see what are the details of your spiritual life. And the question then is, are the details of your spiritual life working, right? Are they in fact purifying your producing manashuddhi, right? So that's a question also, right? Sometimes, when you do spiritual practice and we don't find an effect, sometimes it's it's because we're not doing it properly, or it's the wrong practice, or maybe it's working, we don't know it's working, right? You know, it's like, you know, you can dig in the same place and never get any water until one day you get water, right? You know, it's like maybe it's working the whole time, you know, and you didn't know, you know, you don't know until you get there. Right. So simple answer is that the guru gives the sadhanas, right? Right. But also but also the guru gives the direct sadhanas, right? Or the guru tradition gives direct sadhanas. But there has to be also some background, right? So sometimes it's not just like which mantra to chant or which text to recite or which puja to do or how to do nyasa, although those things are important, right? Sometimes it's a sattvic lifestyle. And you can be careful. Sattvic is like, oh, of course, we encourage people not to be intoxicated, not to give up not to use intoxicants. We encourage people to be vegetarian. We encourage these are important sattvic things that can be done. We encourage people to live pure lives as best within your station. These are of course sattvic things, right? But sometimes that's not the necessary thing. Isn't just that. Sometimes it's a deep correction of our thinking, right, of our relationships, right? And we can do all sattva can be a great tool in the hand of the ego. So look how sattvic I am, look how pure I am, and how impure other people are, right? You know, so that can be, so sometimes it's weird that the very practices that are meant to purify the mind and heart can pollute the mind and heart, right? So there's no answer to anything, right? It's what we do and how we do it, right? And of course, that said, every tradition has a different list of qualifications or prerequisites. Right? Vedanta has a standard. Patanjali has his standard, and he's giving, right? Bhagavatam is his standard, right? So anyway, so that said, right, in general, as far as spiritual practice, we would always, in our tradition, we always would emphasize two things. We have faith in the divine name, not just in mantras, as in the sonic power of mantras, but in the devotional power of calling out to God by name, or by her names or his names, right? So we find that we can encourage that, and we believe that's safe for everybody and appropriate for this age. It's not the only thing, and it may not be the thing for you, but generally speaking, I think only good comes from this. But even more than that, the purpose of calling God by name and invoking continuously God's name is to develop love and devotion and close devotion, right? So, like, I can give, and I have given talks about the importance of singing and meditating upon and chanting God's names, right? And then Usho will listen and go, that's very, very nice, but longing is love is the most important thing, or surrender is the most important thing, right? That's it, right? And so the purpose, maybe chanting God's name or meditating on God's name, can get us to that love and longing and devotion, surrender. Or it's the reason we sing and chant God's name out of love and devotion, longing and surrender. Right. I think so. We'd always bring people back to it. That's our orientation, right? And you can see what happens if you do regular sadhana, right? If you're doing regular sadhana without letting the ego sit on top of your head as you do japa, or the ego get out of control, right? When you do regular sadhana, let's say you do an hour sadhana in the morning, right? Think about that. 1 hour you're sitting there thinking of God, thinking of the infinite, pure, it's like that has to have some effect, right? Maybe the effect will not be immediately noticeable, but it has to have an effect, right? Especially if it's done week after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, right? Like, if you're hard, like full-time, so you look at, everybody has good and bad qualities, including ourselves, and the monks and saints and sadhus and sadhaks we know have good and bad qualities. We're all humans. It's a thing called human life, right? But if you meet monks who live, it's like I've seen like this as well, they're meditating a couple hours a day. That has to have an effect on them, right? And these are the traditionally people who are studying and teaching the scriptures, right? And of course, here we can just buy the book, download it, get the free PDF, or order it on Amazon and get your book and attend the classes, and I can sit there and speak big words, and you can listen to these big words, right? It's well, anyway, we'll see. I think I'll getting late. I can keep going along this line, but I think you get the gist.
Maybe it's like you take like you said, like spending, even just 1 hour in the morning thinking of God. I thought you take a bath in the morning, you're clean the whole day.
Well, you take your bath in the morning, you may not be clean the whole day, but
well,
then if you didn't take a bath, right?
Then you take a bath in the evening again.
Good to take a bath in the evening. So to use that another example of I like very much example of Saint Teresa of Avila, a great mystic doctor of the Catholic Church. She has two things one thing I remember very much. She says, I think about this a lot, and I know when I'm negligent in my own daily practice of morning and evening type of bare minimum sadhana, but the bare minimum becomes bare and minimal, minimalist, right? When your bare minimum becomes bare and minimalist, right? You see the effect, right? And she gave the example, she had two examples, I'll use both of them, that if you burn incense in a room in the morning and you burn incense in the room at night, all day and night, your room smells like incense, right? That's going to have an effect, right? And then that's one thing I think about daily practice. And then the importance of not giving up practice, right? And then she gave the example, I can imagine, because I had a friend that had a pet dove growing up in high school, right? Very beautiful doves and very friendly. And we take her out of the cage and hold them in our hand and pet them, watching, MTV with him, petting the doves, like high school life, and but I remember, if you let go of the dove, it's going to take a couple hours to get the dove back in the cage, right? Once it's gone, it's like, but when you hold it in your hand, it's a little bit of a work, but you have to focus and not let it go, right? And if you let it go, it's not the end of the world, but it's gonna cost you. It's gonna take some time to catch it again. And that's the example she gives, I believe, in about daily practice. That if you keep it going, it's easy to hold. It's not that easy, but it's possible. But once you let it go, you skip a day or skip a week or skip 3 years. A lot of things we've done lately have been 3 years skipping, with our latest little glitch in the world, right? It's very hard to get it back, right? So the daily sadhana is important, and not to give it up, and but not to let it go, and to get the effect. It has to have an effect, right? So yeah. Hari-om Tat Sat. Good question. Sorry I talked on it, but that's what I do. Any questions or comments? I'm wishing there was more. I keep sipping up my empty cup. Metaphor for my spiritual life. Yeah. Anybody? Going once?
Jaima Guruji.
Jaima Sundari. Jaima.
You had mentioned the 4 causes of Aristotle.
Yeah.
I think we had a discussion about this one time,
Yeah.
but I was just curious, how you relate that back to Aveda Vedanta or this verse in particularly.
Well, because I'm not prepared, I don't want to make a nice statement and forget the 4. Can you remind me of the 4 causes? There's efficient cause, material cause.
Matter, form.
Material cause, form. Okay, material cause, formal cause. Yes, and
efficient cause,
and necessary cause.
Final cause.
Final cause. Okay, so this is actually, there's more than 4. One of my Bhagavatam classes at the Duni many years ago, I remember, I think I had like 8 or 9 versions of causation, right? So yeah, so like the material cause, like for instance, the example given, if I met this up, please forgive me, because I wasn't prepared, and I don't want to, I gotta lose my credit immediately. The problem is, you speak beyond your immediate knowledge, and then you make a fool of yourself. But fool I am, so no problem. Example, like a clay, like the example of this. Imagine this cup was clay. The example that's constantly given in the Vedic tradition is clay, right? So let's imagine a clay cup. So so a material cause is, if I get these wrong, the different types of causation is clay, right? Without clay, there can be a cause of clay. Is the cause of a clay cup is clay, right? I believe that's what's meant by material cause. There's also the efficient cause, the one who makes the clay cup, who makes the clay into a cup. I believe that may be one of the efficient cause, right? Then there's a necessary cause, which I don't think is in his list, right? It's like without, there's maybe some things that without, if those things didn't exist, a clay cup would be impossible, right? So it could be the maker of the cup, it could be something different, right? There's also the final, I believe the final cause is the purpose for which the cup exists. If there wasn't the need to make a cup to drink water in, the cup exists. So the cause of the cup is its final goal, right? So these are examples without lists in my head and prepared for that. And so the statement is that the goddess Bhuvaneshwari is the material. She is the efficient or necessary cause. She's the one who makes the world by her will, very much way we think of in Christian Western theistic idea. She's the material cause, that it's made of her, right? And she's also the and she's the final cause is that it's made for her, right? And there's another formal cause. I'm forgetting what's you have a list of what the formal causes, how that relates. I'm forgetting just now. There's formal cause too,
like change in movement. So what you said, which makes the necessary cause.
maybe I'm mixing these a little bit, but the point is that she's all those things. Without her, there's nothing, right? And so she made everything. She made it out of herself, right? She made it for herself, right? So that she's all that's, and she's causation in the real sense, in all possible senses, right? That's the claim of the Devi Gita for sure. And that's the philosophical school of the Devi Gita. She is the cause. That's not the cause of creation. Chapter title, the cause, the ultimate, supreme cause of creation. So she's the supreme cause. She's the there may be many causes of something, right? But she's the supreme cause. Without her, none of those causes could make a world. She made all those, So a lot along those lines. But yeah, but good. Something. Hari-om. Anything else?
Sundarima, could you write those down?
Yeah.
Thank
Sure.
you so much.
Good. Yeah, Aristotle's four causes. Actually, I have to find somewhere I have in mind. Maybe I still have those notes, right? Because there was in the Bhagavatam, I think it was part of the prayers of the two trees that Krishna knocked over. They gave some beautiful prayers, and in it, that described Krishna as the cause, right? The original cause, the uncaused cause, the original cause, and he used all these types of language. And so in that, I gave both the Western and the Indian categories, and I think it was at least, it was more than 4. I think it was 8. If I don't remember them all. It's been a long time. There's a lot of causes for my lack of memory, but we won't go into this. All right, dear friends, I think it is 8:40. We did good. We behaved ourselves more or less. I was 8. My original, I post every week from 7 to 7:30, 7 to 8:30, right? So we didn't go 60 minutes or 40 minutes over. We only went 10 minutes over. So Jai Ma, let's see here. I go to gallery so I can see people. Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Jai Ma Ranmali, I didn't see you. Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Om.
Jai Ma.
Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Good. Jai Ma Kali. Cauliflower, Shamala.
Jai Ma.
Alex, Jai Ma.
Shiva.
Yeah, Shiva worshiping Shiva's feet. Jai Ma, Durga. T.
Jai Ma.
Jai Ma. Michael Nash. All right. Hari-om Tat Sat. And I'm getting a phone call from the Inner Shrine of Dakshineshwar. So I'm going to answer this. I make the email.
Yes.
Jai Ma. Hari-om Tat Sat.
Hari-om.
Hari-om.